For 20 years, I built my family with everything I had. When I married Linda, Haley was just 3 years old, a tiny whirlwind of curls and energy who barely remembered her biological father, Rick. He was a name, a ghost who sent birthday cards late or not at all. I stepped in, not just as a stepfather, but as her dad. I was there for the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the first heartbreak. I paid for piano lessons she never practiced, sat through school plays where she had one line, and clapped like she was the star. I held her when she cried about not fitting in, supported her when she changed majors 3 times in college, and never once made her feel like she was anything less than my daughter. Rick, he was a rumor. The kind of guy who breezed in and out of her life like a traveling salesman with nothing but cheap trinkets and empty promises. A plastic bracelet here, a stuffed animal there, then radio silence for months. He was the guy who missed birthdays, but showed up randomly with a gas station teddy bear and a weak excuse. I didn't care. I didn't need to compete. I was her dad, the one who stayed, the one who bought her first car, taught her how to drive, and bailed her out when she got her first speeding ticket because, in her words, "Dad, I swear, the cop had it out for me." When Haley got engaged, I was over the moon. She called to tell me before anyone else, her voice buzzing with excitement. I had imagined this moment for years. Pictured myself walking her down the aisle, holding back tears as I gave her away. It wasn't even a question in my mind. Who else would do it? The wedding planning took off, and Linda threw herself into it like it was an Olympic sport. Pinterest boards, fabric swatches, cake tastings, I couldn't keep up. Every time I offered help, I was met with the same response. "We've got it covered." I figured that was a good thing. No stress for me, right? I played along, writing checks and letting them have their fun. Then the invitations arrived. A fancy ivory envelope sat on the counter, practically winking at me. I pulled mine from the stack, expecting to see my name front and center, listed as the man who would walk my daughter down the aisle. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Haley will be walked down the aisle by her father, Rick. I read it again and again. My hands started shaking. Maybe it was a mistake, a typo, some kind of oversight. I checked Linda's face as she arranged placed cards at the dining table. She wasn't surprised. She had known. And she hadn't said a word. I let out a dry chuckle. Rick, huh? The same guy who once gave her a birthday card that still had the price sticker on it. 20 years. 2 decades of being there for her, of loving her like my own. And now, just like that, I was nothing more than a name on a guest list. I was just another guy in the crowd, watching as my daughter. No, Rick's daughter now, apparently, walked down the aisle with the man who had been absent for most of her life. I stood there, holding the invitation, my fingers gripping it so tightly the edges curled. The betrayal stung in a way I didn't expect. Not anger, not yet. Just a hollow, sinking feeling that I had been a fool all along. That I had spent 2 decades investing in something that had just been taken away in a single sentence. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. I sat in my living room, staring at the wedding invitation on the coffee table like it was some kind of bad joke. 20 years, 2 decades of raising Haley, making sure she had everything she needed, only to be discarded like an old coupon that had expired years ago. Linda's response when I confronted her? A shrug. She wanted to give him this chance. A chance? He had 20 years' worth of chances and blew every single one. Now, out of nowhere, he was suddenly worthy of the moment I had waited for. My stomach twisted as I stared at the invitation again, reading and rereading the words like they'd magically change. The rational part of me screamed to forget it. Don't go. Let them have their fairy tale. But something inside me, maybe pride, maybe sheer stubbornness, refused to back down. I had paid for a good chunk of this wedding. The venue, the catering, even part of the honeymoon. My name wasn't on that invitation, but my money sure was. If I was nothing more than a walking checkbook, then fine. I'd be there. I'd sit in the crowd, watch them pat Rick on the back for being Father of the Year, and see just how much of my life had been a lie. The wedding day came fast. Too fast. I showed up, dressed in the suit I had picked out months ago, back when I thought I'd be the one walking Haley down the aisle. Guests milled around, sipping overpriced champagne, chatting about how beautiful everything was. Nobody noticed me. Or maybe they did, but they didn't care. When the ceremony started, I sat near the back, gripping the armrest of my chair, my jaw tight. The music swelled, and there she was, Haley, glowing, stunning. Everything I had hoped she'd be on her wedding day. But my chest clenched when I saw who had her arm. Rick, the man who had spent 2 decades being a part-time visitor, was now the star of the show. He strutted down the aisle with a grin like he had just won the lottery, eating up the attention, nodding as people whispered about how great it was that he finally stepped up. The crowd clapped like he had just won some kind of fatherhood award. I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palms. Then came the speeches, one after another. People stood to toast the couple. They spoke about love, about family, about the amazing man who had always been there for Haley. Rick. They talked about Rick. Every mention of father was his name. Every memory, every story. It was like I never existed. No mention of the late-night study sessions. The times I sat in the bleachers cheering her on at soccer games. The Christmas mornings where I played Santa because Rick had somewhere else to be. None of it. I was invisible. I sat there, my face burning, my stomach churning. I wanted to stand up, flip the table, say something, anything, but what would it change? They had already erased me. I had spent 20 years being a father, and in a single night, I realized I had just been a wallet with a pulse. I grabbed my untouched glass of champagne, swirled it once, and set it back down. There was nothing left for me here. I had spent weeks trying to shake off the wedding, but it clung to me like a bad smell that just wouldn't wash out. Everywhere I turned, reminders popped up. Linda posting pictures on Facebook with captions about the perfect day, relatives gushing about how beautiful Haley looked, even coworkers asking how it felt to give away my daughter. I forced a smile, nodded, and changed the subject. What was I supposed to say? That I sat in the back like some distant uncle, while the man who had been absent for most of her life played the hero? I buried myself in work, routine, anything to stop replaying that moment. I even convinced myself that maybe it was better this way. Let them have their picture-perfect story. I was done being the fool who kept giving when it was clear I wasn't part of the family picture anymore. Then, weeks later, my phone buzzed. Haley. The name alone made my stomach drop. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won. I pressed accept, bringing the phone to my ear. Her voice was bright, casual, like nothing had happened. Hey, Dad. How are you? For a second, I almost played along, almost convinced myself that she was calling to check in, to apologize, to acknowledge the way I had been erased. But then came the next part. So, we're in Bali right now, and it's amazing. The resort is beautiful. The beaches are incredible. But we ran into a little issue, a pause. Our credit card limit is maxed out. I was wondering if you could help us out. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. I had just heard a complete stranger call me Dad, like it was nothing, like she hadn't rewritten our entire history. And now, after everything, she wanted money? A flicker of old habits kicked in. I had always helped, covered tuition, paid for emergency car repairs, even sent extra when she studied abroad and underestimated costs. I was the safety net, the emergency fund she never had to think twice about. But this time was different. I let the silence stretch. I could feel her waiting, expecting the same answer she had always gotten. I exhaled slowly and kept my voice calm. Ask Rick. He's your real father, right? Silence. It was brief, but I caught it. That tiny pause where reality hit like a freight train. Then came the stiff, clip response. I understand. Click. I set the phone down and stared at it, feeling something shift inside me. No anger, no regret, just clarity. They had taken and taken, but the moment I stopped giving, the illusion cracked. I got up, walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and took a long sip. For the first time in years, I wasn't just their backup plan. I was finally free. Linda stormed into the room before I even had time to put my phone down. Her face was tight, arms crossed, the universal sign that I was about to get an earful. "You just turned your back on her," she said. "How could you do that?" I let out a slow breath. Here we go. She didn't get it. She never had. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about some honeymoon hiccup. It was about respect, about how I had been erased from my own daughter's life and then expected to keep playing my part like nothing had changed. "She's our daughter," Linda pressed. "You can't just decide you're done." Something in me snapped. "She decided," I said. The moment she let Rick take my place, the moment she stood there smiling while everyone praised him like some kind of hero, she made her choice. And now she wants me to step in when it's convenient. No, not anymore. Linda shook her head like I was some heartless monster. "You're being cruel." Cool. The word felt ridiculous coming from her. I had spent 20 years giving everything I had, loving Haley like she was my own flesh and blood. And now I was cruel because I finally set a boundary, because I finally said no. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to stay calm. This isn't about being cruel. It's about being done. I have given, and what have I gotten in return? Nothing. I was good enough to pay for her school, good enough to pay for the wedding, but not good enough to be her father when it actually mattered. Now she wants a favor? She can ask Rick. That's her real dad, right? Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't say anything. That silence told me everything I needed to know. She had always put Haley first. Always. Even at my expense. And now she expected me to keep playing along, to keep putting myself last for the sake of keeping the peace. I wasn't doing it anymore. "So that's it?" she finally asked. "You're just walking away?" I didn't answer right away. I grabbed my keys from the counter, the weight of them grounding me. Then, finally, I looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm just choosing myself for once." I turned and walked toward the front door, but this time it wasn't an escape. It was just space. I needed air, needed to clear my head before I said something I couldn't take back. The evening air was crisp, the sky turning that perfect shade of orange and pink. I stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Behind me, through the window, I could see Linda still standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, lost in thought. We weren't done talking. Not yet. But for now, I just needed to walk. Months passed, and for the first time in years, I felt free. No more waiting for the next call asking for money. No more feeling like I was the family ATM. I got back into my old hobbies, the ones I had shelved while bending over backward for everyone else. Saturday mornings were now for fishing instead of fixing someone's mess. I started golfing again, not because I was any good, but because I liked having an excuse to spend a few hours outside, away from people who drained me. For the first time in a long time, I was spending money on myself. A new truck, a long weekend trip to the mountains. Hell, I even started looking at motorcycles, something Linda always talked me out of. Every swipe of my card felt like a tiny rebellion, and it felt damn good. Then one night, just as I was settling in with a cold beer and some old action movie I had probably seen 20 times, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. If it was important, they'd leave a message. But then I saw the name, Brandon, Haley's husband. I stared at the screen, debating. We hadn't spoken since the wedding, and honestly, I had no reason to start now. But curiosity got the best of me. I opened the message. "Hey, Mike, can we meet up? Need to talk." No small talk. No pleasantries. Just straight to the point. I exhaled, rolling my eyes. I already had a good idea where this was going, but I agreed to meet. If nothing else, I wanted to hear the excuse they'd come up with this time. We met at a bar the next evening. I got there first, ordered a beer, and waited. Brandon showed up 10 minutes late, looking uncomfortable, like a guy who had rehearsed a speech in the mirror, but still knew it wasn't going to land well. He sat down, didn't even bother pretending this was a social call. "Look, man," he started, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll just get to it. We're in a bit of a financial situation." I took a slow sip of my beer, waiting. Our rent's behind. Bills are piling up. We thought we'd have more breathing room after the wedding, but things are tighter than expected. There it was. The same old song, different singer. Haley wanted to reach out, but she figured you were still upset, so I said I'd talk to you. I nodded, letting him talk, letting him think he was building up to something convincing. "So," he finally got to the point, "I was hoping you could help us out. Just this once. You've always been there, and, well, we could really use it." I leaned back, crossing my arms. The irony was almost funny. Months of silence. No check-ins. No apologies. But now, when things got tough, suddenly I was worth reaching out to. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Then I set down my beer, gave him a small smile, and said, "Not happening." Brandon blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Come on, Mike. You know how things are." I took another sip, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah, I do. And for once, they're not my problem." He exhaled sharply, staring at his drink like it had an answer at the bottom of the glass. But I didn't get up. Not yet. I wanted to see just how far he'd go. Brandon stared at his drink, swirling it like the answer to his problems might appear at the bottom. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. He had expected me to cave, to do what I always did, fix things. I wasn't that guy anymore. I took a slow sip of my beer and leaned back. "Have you tried calling Rick?" Brandon's head snapped up like I had just slapped him. His expression twisted into something between frustration and embarrassment. He scratched the back of his neck, suddenly finding the bar top fascinating. "He's not answering." I exhaled through my nose, fighting back a smirk. Of course he wasn't. Rick had always been good at two things: showing up when it made him look good and disappearing when things got tough. But this was different. Haley hadn't just needed a father for a photo op. She needed help, real help. And now that she was finally looking for him to be the dad she'd chosen, he was nowhere to be found. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, I know this is awkward, but..." "No, it's not awkward for me at all." I cut in. "It's a little awkward for you, though. Sitting here, asking for help from the guy your wife decided wasn't good enough to be in her life anymore." His face reddened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There wasn't much to say. I sighed and set my beer down. "Brandon, let me save you some time. I'm done. Done bailing them out. Done being the backup plan. I spent 20 years being the guy who showed up no matter what, and I got replaced the second it was convenient. That's fine. That's their choice. But now they get to live with it." Brandon rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. "It's not just Haley, you know. Linda's worried about her too. She thinks..." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made him stop mid-sentence. "Linda? The same Linda who told me I was cruel for finally standing up for myself." I shook my head. She made her choice, too. The weight of my words settled in, and for the first time since he sat down, Brandon looked like he actually understood. He wasn't just here for money. He was here because they all realized something they never thought possible. I wasn't going to save them this time. I picked up my beer and took another sip. "You and Haley wanted Rick to be the father. Well, congratulations. You got him." Brandon looked down, his fingers drumming against the table. There was no comeback, no argument. He knew I was right. I could have felt bad for him, maybe even for Haley. But the truth was, I didn't. They had made their decisions. And for once, I was making mine. I drained the last of my beer, slapped a 20 on the table, and stood up. Good luck, Brandon. You're going to need it. As I stepped outside, the crisp night air hit me, a sharp contrast to the stale, heavy atmosphere of the bar. The neon sign flickered above, casting a dull glow on the pavement. I took a deep breath, letting it settle in. For the first time in years, I was walking away without looking back. Home stopped feeling like home. The silence was the worst part. It was thick, suffocating, lingering in every corner like a heavy fog. Linda and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped, emotionless, like two co-workers forced to share an office they both hated. She didn't have to say it outright, but I knew. She blamed me for everything. For Haley struggling, for not giving in, for choosing myself over the never-ending cycle of sacrifices. To her, I was the reason our family was fractured. One night, she finally let it slip. If you had just helped her, we wouldn't be in this mess. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. That's rich, Linda. You think throwing more money at them would have fixed anything? Haley made her choice. You backed her. And now, because I didn't roll over like I always did, I'm the bad guy. She crossed her arms, her eyes cold. You gave up on her. On us. Us. That word barely held meaning anymore. There was no us. There hadn't been for a long time. The days passed in a slow, unbearable crawl. I started staying late at work, lingering at the gym longer than usual, even taking the scenic route home, just to delay the moment I had to step through that front door. I'd sit in my truck outside for minutes, just staring at the house, wondering what version of Linda I was about to walk into. That's when I started running into Samantha more often. She had always been around, one of Linda's oldest friends, though we never talked much before. But now, she was the only one who actually saw things for what they were. The only one who didn't tiptoe around the truth. You did the right thing, Mike, she told me one evening over coffee. They took you for granted for years. It's about time you put yourself first. It was weird at first, hearing someone say it out loud. I had been drowning in guilt for weeks, wondering if I had made a mistake. But with every conversation, every brutally honest remark from Samantha, it started sinking in I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. Linda, on the other hand, barely acknowledged my existence. We lived in the same house, but in different worlds. She cooked for one, slept facing away from me, and barely reacted when I came home late. One night, after another dinner filled with silence, I found myself texting Samantha. Nothing inappropriate, just conversation. Something real. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. The more we talked, the more I realized how different she was from Linda. Where Linda shut me out, Samantha listened. Where Linda blamed, Samantha understood. One night, we ran into each other at the grocery store. I had grabbed a frozen pizza. She was debating between two bottles of wine. Red or white? She asked, holding them up. Depends. Are we celebrating or surviving? She laughed. A little of both. We ended up talking in the parking lot for almost an hour. It was easy. No judgment, no accusations. Just two people who understood each other. And I wasn't stupid. I knew where this road led if I let it. But honestly, for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I cared. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. Linda must have seen something. Maybe a text, maybe a glance too long in Samantha's direction. Either way, she knew, and she wasn't about to let it slide. The second I walked through the door, she was waiting, arms crossed, foot tapping against the floor like a countdown timer. I barely had time to put my keys down before she went off like a fire alarm. How long? I sighed, rubbing my temples. How long what? You and Samantha. Don't play dumb, Mike. How long? There it was. The accusation, the confrontation, the inevitable blow-up I knew was coming. I exhaled, keeping my voice even. We're friends. That's it. She let out a bitter laugh. Right? Friends don't text each other at midnight. Friends don't meet up in parking lots like teenagers sneaking around. I wasn't about to get dragged into a screaming match. I had spent too many years defending myself in arguments I was never going to win. But this time was different, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who felt guilty. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. You know what's funny, Linda? For years, I did everything for this family. For you. For Haley. I gave and gave, and the second I stopped, I became the villain. Isn't that convenient? She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. You backed Haley when she replaced me. You called me cruel for finally standing up for myself. You let me sit in silence while everyone acted like I didn't exist. And now that I'm actually choosing myself for once, you suddenly care? Something flickered in her eyes. Anger, frustration, maybe even realization. But she wasn't backing down. So, what now? You just walk away? She asked, her voice sharp. I let out a slow exhale, feeling lighter than I had in years. Linda, our marriage ended a long time ago. I was just the last one to admit it. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. That night, I packed a bag. Not out of anger. Not to make a scene. Just because it was time. The next morning, I filed for divorce. Samantha offered to let me crash at her place, but I wasn't looking to jump from one mess into another. Instead, I got myself a cheap apartment. Something small but mine. A place where no one expected anything from me. And for the first time in years, I felt free. A week later, my phone buzzed. A message from Haley. You'll always be my dad. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A few months ago, that message would have broken me, would have had me running back, trying to fix everything like I always did. But now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive. I set the phone down, leaned back, and took a deep breath. For the first time, my life was mine, and I wasn't in a rush to give it away again.